Good evening. Thank you for joining us. My name is Mariam Kelly, and I'm a managing attorney with the immigration program at Community Legal Services in East Palo Alto. So with us tonight, we have the program leads from each of our 3 programs, and we're going to be talking about a few things. First, we're going to talk just in general about how this past year has gone. We'll talk also about how COVID-19 has affected the communities that we've served, and we'll also talk about how our organization has pivoted to try to respond to the needs of our community in these changing and challenging times. So with me, I have our housing program lead, Jason Tarricone. We have Cristina dos Santos, who is the director of our immigration program, and we have Katrina Logan, who is the director of our economic advancement program. So thank you for being with us. So I just wanted to say that I'm really excited that we're all able to be in the same room tonight. Everybody is fully vaccinated, which is really exciting. So let's start with talking about how the pandemic has hit our immigrant communities. So Cristina, can you please tell us about how COVID-19 has affected the immigrants in our communities?
Immigrants in our community have faced many obstacles that predate the pandemic, and so much of that has been exacerbated by the pandemic conditions. For example, it's always been really challenging for undocumented folks to access medical care because they may not have a Social Security card or know how to access it. It's also been really challenging for immigrants to necessarily access jobs that provide a living wage and dignity. And connected with that, a challenge around obtaining housing security, and also risks of experiencing harassment or discrimination at the hands of landlords who use someone's undocumented status against them. So like I said, the pandemic has made things much worse. When it comes to lack of access to medical care, this was always, a matter of life and death for many people, but to now, at this point, that has been really exacerbated by the pandemic. We have many clients, unfortunately, who have contracted COVID, some who have ended up in a critical condition and hospitalized. With respect to access to work, so many of our clients work in informal sectors that were hit really hard by the pandemic. Things like cleaning services, janitorial, day laborer type work like handyman jobs. And so people who were already kind of living on the edge of poverty, in many cases lost their small amount of income, and that really impacted people's ability to maintain housing security. And so we've seen families who were maybe doubling up, now potentially tripling up, and ending up in spaces that are extremely crowded, which of course puts them at great risk of exposure to the virus.
Thank you for sharing that, Cristina. So I think it's a good segue to talk to Jason about housing. How has housing instability affected our clients during the pandemic?
I want to echo a lot of what Cristina said. Even before the pandemic started, a lot of the client communities we represent were living on the precipice of disaster. They were living paycheck to paycheck with housing costs and food costs and the cost of living so high in the Bay Area. And so even before the pandemic, if someone lost a job or got sick and couldn't work for a couple days, a lot of them faced eviction very fast if they couldn't pay that month of rent. And then when the pandemic hit and things closed down last March, those families were more likely to be the people on the front lines who lost their jobs. They work in industries where you can't work at home, the way that a lot of us have been lucky to. And so they lost their jobs immediately, lost their income, and then April rent was due. And we knew that thousands of families on the peninsula were not going to be able to pay the rent. So our housing team and other advocates worked with community members and elected officials to educate people about legal authorization to pass an eviction moratorium, given the public health crisis, and given the legal authority that cities and counties already have to regulate evictions if they want to. And so we were able to advocate for San Mateo County to pass a moratorium very quickly so that people did not get evicted in huge numbers in April of 2020, right after the pandemic started. But that was just a temporary solution. It didn't deal with the county measure didn't deal with the ballooning rent debt that people would have when the moratorium was over. And so we and others around the state continued advocating And eventually the courts stepped in to slow down the eviction process and pause things to protect the public health. And then lawmakers in Sacramento passed a very strong eviction moratorium for the state, for all residents in California.
It's really great to hear that these efforts have helped people stay in their homes. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jason. So Katrina, can you talk to us a little bit about the challenges that workers have experienced during this time?
Yeah, similar to what Cristina said, the industries that we actually discovered where most of our clients work include the restaurant industry or food services, construction, and janitorial. And so those are all jobs where people have to go in person to do the job. Many of those jobs are, do pay either at or below the living wage. And I think in a lot of situations, some of our clients really are at risk, not only to COVID, but also to job loss or, just being fired because, a lot of companies really suffered big economic impacts when the pandemic hit. And so what we saw a lot during the pandemic were situations where a lot of our undocumented clients sought informal work, trying to really just find any income that they could, and unfortunately were taken advantage of, by employers who were either unsophisticated, didn't understand what the labor laws are in California and, what they should have been paying their clients. And then, on top of that, right, it's difficult to recover wages from those types of employers who probably also are suffering economically. And so, we've seen a lot of injustice in terms of how our workers are experiencing COVID and how, they are finding work and really trying to earn an income throughout the pandemic. One of the clients was someone who was trying to break into the healthcare industry. She got her record cleaned up because she wanted to, become a certified nursing assistant, and really benefited from the mock interview workshop because that's somewhere where she is going to have to address her past and talk about, how she's moved forward and how it won't impact her ability to do the job. And I think that, one of the things I learned, at least from that session from one of our pro bono attorneys, was that, what he said was in this job market particularly, resilience is actually a skill. Having resilience, having that ability to overcome, really tough situations and move forward, with your life and learn from your mistakes, that's something that employers want. And so really understanding how to bring that forward, how to tell your story in a positive way. I think all of us really learned a lot, and finally, like now applying for jobs when, especially in the healthcare industry, workers are needed sorely. It's one of the biggest industries of growth in our area and obviously in the country because of COVID. And so we need more healthcare workers, and we hope that our clients aren't left out of that.
Cristina, do you have any stories from immigration in terms of how families have been affected by the pandemic and the associated challenges?
So one story that I would like to share that illustrates both the challenges our clients face but also the enormous resilience is a story of a husband and wife where we are representing the husband because unfortunately he's facing deportation proceedings. Both he and his wife are immigrants. They've lived in our community for more than 10 years. They have 3 U.S. citizen children. They have started their own business where they were providing cleaning services, though of course during the pandemic they were not able to continue to provide those services and faced an extremely challenging time without access to an income. Now that things are starting to open up a little bit more, they've started working around the clock to try and make up some of the losses that they experienced during the many months that they couldn't work. And it's admirable how they are taking this moment to do what they can, but the cost on that family of having to work those kind of hours around the clock is really high. In addition to having the ongoing fear that at any time the husband could be removed from this country. So as we have experienced our clients losing rights and protections under the prior administration, we're not going to let that happen without a fight. One of the things that we have done as an organization is that we have been involved as plaintiffs in lawsuits to challenge the government for anti-immigrant policies, and one of those being the policy that removes work authorization eligibility for many asylum seekers, like the client whose story I shared.
Thank you for sharing that, Cristina. Let's talk a little bit about how each of our programs has adapted to these new challenges and how we've engaged our teams and how that has looked.
People still come to our door and need to see somebody and need to access services in person, whether it's because they, lost their phone service because they couldn't pay their phone bills, or, they know where we are and they want to actually see somebody in person. I think that, we are a trusted institution in the community, and people do need to access us in person. So actually during the pandemic, our operations team actually set us all up with installing a Ring doorbell. We now have handicap accessible, doors, so that our receptionist doesn't have to get up every time to, give somebody, the document that they're picking up or that they need to drop off. We also renovated our backyard so that now we can actually use it to meet with clients outdoors, and safely and socially distanced. So yeah, we've made a lot of changes around the office and in the office to make sure that we can safely work with clients in person when needed.
It is really challenging to work with people who have survived trauma over the phone instead of in person. It just takes a lot longer to build that trust. Our team has been really careful to be very explicit about confidentiality and how that continues to apply, although we're doing all of our work over the phone. We also really try to accommodate our clients in a whole new way in terms of ensuring that they have a private moment where they can get away from whoever else they share their space with, so that they can share their story privately and confidentially. We've also done a lot to, within what's possible, connect our clients to mental health services so they can get the support they need while they go through a very challenging process with us.
So for housing, how have things changed with the pandemic and how our teams are mobilizing?
We created a new website with information about all the eviction moratoriums, and we pivoted to do a lot more community education around these new laws, so that people know what their rights are, so that they don't just move out on 3 days' notice because their landlord tells them to. And so at the same time, people weren't getting evicted necessarily, but they did still need to pay the rent. And so we shifted a lot of staffing resources, and it was a joint effort by Katrina's EAP team and the housing team to get tons of rental assistance money out the door early on in the pandemic, because we didn't know how long the moratoriums were going to last. Over 200 checks went out just during the pandemic, and that's way more than what we used to do. And luckily, funders made those funds available. So we spent about $500,000 in rental assistance during the first 10 months of the pandemic. We plan to spend a lot more in the coming months. But we see that as a tool we can use. It's just another tool to prevent evictions and keep people in their homes. And so we're happy to use whatever tools are available to help the community not get evicted. What we're hearing now from one family in particular, and this is emblematic of what a lot of people are facing, is they've been vaccinated or they're getting vaccinated. Things are opening back up again, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people are going back to work right away. Or if they are back at work, they may not have the same hours they used to have.
Right.
So they're still not sure how they're going to pay the rent. And there's just so much uncertainty about what's going to happen for tenants in the next few months.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Jason. Thank you all so much for contributing to this really insightful and moving conversation. I've learned a lot about what we've been doing, and I really appreciate all of the new and inventive approaches we've had to put into place because of COVID. So I think that all of us and all of our CLSEPA teams have done an amazing job responding to the needs of the moment in a really challenging year. So congratulations for being so resourceful in the face of a once-in-a-lifetime crisis. And on behalf of everybody participating tonight, thank you very, very much for all that you do every day.